Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new French Rugby Podcast. It is in English, in case the title confused you, but we've got a huge amount of French knowledge and rugby IQ on board. I'm your host, Tim Groves, and I'm joined by a duo who can tell you everything you ever wanted to know about rugby in France. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to the recently retired France international, Benjamin Kayser, and Scotland international, Johnnie Beattie. How are you guys?
Well, we're really good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Newly retired is what I like to hear. It's been over a year now, but let's just say that I'm so staying incredibly fit that I could be a professional rugby player, right? Is that what we're trying to say? So I love a little compliment to start this, to get this going. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm good as well. But quite clearly, I couldn't still play. There's absolutely no chance. That's why I retired. But good. Looking forward to this. Good topic. Looking forward to the podcast. I'm excited to be part of it.
So just give us a bit of background then. Why are we doing this? What kind of insight do we want to give people? What should people expect?
Every single time that I speak about French rugby, there's this sort of myth and unknown about this exotic place just across the channel that seems to be a little bit crazy. And they always ask me, differences. What's the difference between French rugby and English rugby? What is the difference in culture, in stories, in ways of behaving, in pre-match, post-match, rugby, whatever it is, life in general. And every time that I have those deep chats, whatever, that are basically my life, not only are they enjoyable, but on top of that, I was like, it's the first time when I get something around it. So I'm in love with France. Obviously, this is my home country, but I had the weakness of falling in love with an English woman. So I am obviously hooked to England as well. And Johnny, who is a proud Scotsman, fell in love with France. So we just wanted, that's my idea. We just wanted to get this exoticism out on the table, some juicy stories, kill some myths, create some new ones, and just have fun.
100%. And it is. I mean, I'm the opposite. Obviously, I started my career in Scotland, but my family was very much Francophile from a young age. We were here every summer camping. I learned to order frite maillot when I was 10, and I absolutely loved it. So if I ever knew that I could have a chance to play over here, I was gone. I came over when I was 26. I'm now 34, so it's been a long time, and I've loved every minute of it. And again, to go with what Benji said, the stories that you get aligned with the stars that play in this competition, the talent that we have over here, it's worth talking about. And having played there in English and speaking French, none of my English teammates even knew what was going on. So the aim is to dispel a lot of the myths around French rugby, transfer that over in English language, and let everyone in the world digest exactly what French rugby can offer, because it's an amazing place, an amazing part of the world, and the rugby is fantastic.
And you mentioned the names there. The top 14 does have some of the biggest stars in the world. And usually about now, we'd be getting perhaps one of them on, a guest, to have a chat with them about the stories, about how life's going in France. But given that it's the first episode, obviously we want to get to know you guys. So before we do that, who are the kind of names that you'd like to get on in future? Who are the kind of people that you want to talk to?
So there's a real mix. I think we're going to be looking at 3 different strands of people. You're looking at ex-players, French and foreign. So guys like Jonny Wilkinson, who came over here and revived his career. Serge Betson, who also had both, was at Wasps and at Biarritz. And then your current crop that's over here. So guys like Jerome Kano, Sergio Parise, Victor Vito, guys that are absolutely killing it. It'd be great to talk to them. You've also got your coaching element, guys like Philippe Saint-André, English speakers that can give us a bit of an insight into their clubs, their inner workings of their teams and their culture and what they're trying to set about. So it's going to be a real mix. It's going to be diverse, and hopefully we can get some seriously good guests on to give us their stories from the club rugby in France.
Benjamin?
So my view is more, picture myself being ISM Clermont-Auvergne player for the last 10 years and seeing all those rugby superstars coming about in France. And I want to understand, because that's always been a fascination of mine, why would one guy kill it and the other be chucked in the bin? That's the sort of understanding I want to get, because there's some incredible stories. I play with James Haskell, who's quite a funky character in Stade Français. But I also played with John Fox Davis, and you see all those guys come in and understand that you get a lot more through those conversations to understand the reality of what French rugby is, rather than just speaking about the big structural problems and all that. You understand what the day-to-day life is and how it will impact further down the line, the domino effect. Because let's face it, French rugby has been a disaster for the last 10 years roughly. if you take away the last Six Nations, gave a new positive, dynamic, open attack, Fabien Galthié style rugby. Cool. But before that, and I was part of it, and I'm partly to blame, obviously, we were part of an extremely poor national side. 2011 is probably the worst thing that could ever happen to French rugby, because you got to the World Cup finals, everything's fine. Everything's not fine. There's obviously quality players. There's obviously quality youngsters. There's quality coaches. There's incredible fans. Yes, but it's like this. It's a roller coaster in France. You need to be ready. I always like to give the example of a 100-meter race. Well, you'll be racing against Usain Bolt, and then when you turn your head, then you'll have the hurdles. You're sprinting a 110-meter hurdle, and that's the difference. And you will hit them every time because you think, is it because I'm not fast enough? No, it's because this whole structure is different. We are different people. The French are quite a wild, different type of breed, but that's what makes people fall in love with us.
So we'll get into that culture difference shortly, and there's no one better place to talk about it than you, Benjamin, because you mentioned it before. You're in Tunbridge Wells. What's happened? Why are you there? What are you doing?
Well, I'm whipped. That's what happened. So my wife decided to go back to England after 10 years. I met my wife, was playing in Leicester Tigers. She was studying there. She's from Kent. And so after 10 beautiful years in France, 11 beautiful years in France, and 2 amazing children, we decided to come back to put them in a school around here. Her parents are sort of from the area. And with Eurostar, it's sad, but I'm closer living here to Paris than being based in Clermont. So the idea is that, and I'm going back to study. I'm doing an executive MBA in Oxford, almost like pretty much part-time. So to figure out what the next step of my life will be, here was a good base. But the general idea, I would much rather be in Johnnie Beattie's shoes right now and be by the beach every afternoon. But you got to do what's best for your family. And the missus said, pack it up and go back to England. So I did so.
And Johnny, you're staying in France?
Yeah, definitely medium term. So as I said, we came over here in 2012. During lockdown, we got the good news that we're now French citizens. We've got our passports, and we're happy here. The kids are in school. Our 2 were born here. We've got a 3rd one on the way coming in December, and we really, really enjoy the way of life. We've absolutely loved it. We're well integrated with the local community. We live in the southwest, so in between Hossegor and Biarritz, which is surf town, and we're really happy. So we're going to give it at least 2, 3, 4 years, see if we can handle raising 3 kids at the beach by ourselves without grandparents. And if we can't, then maybe go back to Scotland. But right now we're having a great time. So rugby finished for me in January, now looking at a few different projects out here and starting our life in France.
And how is your surfing, Johnny?
My wife got me my first lesson, and it's booked for 3 weeks time, I think. So we're going to try and find, I think, an 11 or a 12-foot board to try and take this weight, which has obviously gone up a bit since I stopped. But really looking forward to it. It's been good just getting this summer swimming with the kids in the ocean and enjoying it. So the next step is getting that surfboard and getting involved properly.
Could be a second career, because I was going to ask you, you've both hung up your boots, within the last year or so. So just talk to us a bit about how difficult a decision that was for each of you, and also what happens, because there's a lot of talk about the chômage in France, and Benjamin, you're coming over to England to study. So just talk about how they call it le petit mot in France, don't they? So how was that as a decision, and working out what you're going to do next?
Well, for me personally, it was a relatively easy decision, even if it was quite sudden, because it was a medical decision. I had two neck operations already, and I had another problem in the level below. And so they were talking about the third operation. I was like, listen, I'm 35. I did what I had to do. I still had 2 years contract, but 2 years contract is 40 odd games. It's potentially 4 more titles. I would have absolutely loved, because it's a heartache of mine to win the Champions Cup and lift it once in my career, but I didn't, but that's okay. So it was more that at one point the neurosurgeon came to see me. It's like, even if good scenario, you get the third up, everything's okay, and you finish your career all good, in 15 years time, because of arthrosis on your discs, your fingers might start to move because of the problems on spine. I was like, okay, listen, in 15 years, I'm 50. I want to be playing tennis and running up and down my not so much finished garden with my kids, and that was really it. So packed it up pretty suddenly. But I think honestly, there's a lot of cash in rugby, especially in top 14. But there will never be enough for guys to only do that. And I think that's obviously, we always say you guys get paid, 25 times less than footballers? Maybe. But I think that's a gift, because at least it gives the possibility, it forces the players to stay in connection with the reality of life. They stay in connection with local communities, with what it is to get up and work. And so you're constantly interested about sponsors, networking, who can you chat to, who can you be a little bit curious in your head about what to do next, because that's at least the way that I was brought up. From day one, they told me, listen, this is going to be like a golden time of your life, but it's only just a period. It will stop. It will end. You will have to then do something normal, because I don't know how you feel, Johnny, but I don't feel that I've worked hard for what I had to do, but I never consider it as a job, even if it's very, very hard. It's more of a hard passion. It's like a hard drive thing. But that's it really. And then you just pack up, take the decision, go. It still hurts. I hated the weeks, so I don't miss them. I absolutely loved the Saturdays, and I missed them dearly. I missed even towards the end of my career, everybody's like, oh, are you still stressed before games? Do you feel relaxed? Like, the day that I'm not stressed and I'm just going to walk on the pitch, kill me, shoot me. There's no point. Otherwise, when you do win and when you do something good, it doesn't feel at all fantastic, does it? So no, I miss the Saturdays. I miss the boys' commentary, and doing a few little things helps me get there, but it's just not the same. You don't get run over by a truck, and you don't feel like you've been hit by a piano after commentary a game. So that's very different. But I will miss it. I miss it. I will always miss it. But I had to stop. I
think also to add though, Benji, we've both been pretty lucky in the longevity that we've had. Like obviously you've had to stop a couple of years short, but the amount of friends I had that had to retire, say age 22, 23, 25, bad knee injury, they never really got to do what they wanted to do. We've both been lucky, got to play for the French team. I got to play for Scotland. You played in England and in France, me, Scotland and in France. So I think we can both not pat ourselves on the back, that's too far, but we're lucky to have done what we have. And I think if we hadn't, it would have been harder to stop. So there's a lot of people where it's much tougher. Whereas I feel we both got 14, 15, 16 years, 16 seasons of pro rugby, which is tough on your body and mentally as well when you get to the end. So for me, it was a more natural come to the end of a life cycle of something that I loved, but I always knew, like Benji said, you have, if you're lucky, 10 to 15 years to earn, try and put money aside, plan, and then get into the working world after rugby and put your best foot forward. So that's the sort of stepping and the footing that we're on to now. And it's going to be a good challenge, but it should, again, be a good time and good fun.
And I don't want to lift the curtain behind the scenes too much for the listeners, but Johnny, we can see you've got a nice big open plan kitchen diner. You're well settled in France. Benjamin, we've seen behind the scenes, like there's a hole in the roof, like the kids are in a hotel or something. What's going on?
Well, so you want to talk money, huh? You want to talk money. To be fair. No, but you speak about France and top 14, you have to talk about money. Money's been a blessing, but it's always also been the curse, I think, of top 14. We've created this monster, which is clearly dominating French rugby in general. So we'll speak about it later, I'm sure, but the political differences, the federation at the moment has got zero decision-making power. Canal Plus, which is the top 14 broadcaster in France, and the league, which is literally top 14 and second division, the professional rugby in France, decide of pretty much everything. Ils font la pluie et le beau temps, like we say in French. They make it rain, they make the sun come out. So it is a big thing. Of course, most of the foreigners that come to France come for that financial power, but if they stay, it's for something else. If they love it, it's for something else. If they get into the gist of actually picking up make the best out of a crazy situation, then it's for something else. But there is a lot of cash. I mean, I started my career in 2003, 2004 in Stade Français. Max Guazzini was still the president, and he was the guy that created this whole new rugby. So everybody took the piss out of him. Pink jerseys for the players. Going to Stade de France with Pom Pom Girls show before. He's the only guy that filled for 6 league games, premiership games, top 14 games, 80,000 people in Stade de France. When you look at the situation now, I mean, he was 15 years ahead of everyone. So he really did. But you thought you would get every single president who had a bit of money would be like him, because he gave his life and soul and every single penny that he had to Stade Français. To then, the club had financial trouble, and then it got bought back for €1, but obviously took all the debt with it to someone. So he got 0 of his money back. It was a passion project. The only problem is, do you think that everybody's like him? Do you think that the racing president, do you think that Mohed Altrad is like this? Do you think that Dr. Wild in Stade Français is like this? Do you think that all those guys are like this? That It's called like philanthropy. I don't know how you say that in English, but it just doesn't work. So this money is a blessing because we filled stadiums, we created something exciting. Stars want to come. I mean, playing against Johnny Wilkinson, I thought that was a gift. I almost want to say Mohed Boudjelal, thanks. That's Bakis Bota, Ma Nonu, whatever, you name it. Matt Ghetto, I mean, that Toulon side who cost me a lot of depressing sort of feelings at some point. They had a crazy good team when you think about it. So if you come across to play, one international, you play once against the All Blacks, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. I played against Sonny Bill Williams, Maanonu, Drew Mitchell, Matt Ghetto, Johnny Wilkinson, Juan Lobe, Bakis Bota, Ali Williams, Carl Heyman, Andrew Sheridan, and all those guys were in one team. And that's because of the financial power and the activity of the top 14 and the fact that Toulon there's worse places in the world to live. When you don't train, you can go for a jet ski tour, around an island. So there's worse places. But money is big. Money is a hot topic, and money is, and that system is being pumped in my mouth at the moment by COVID, because you realize how fragile it is. You realize where's the stress behind top 14 from? It's from the money. You ask Johnny, you lose at home. Of course, it's a pride thing because in France you can't lose at home. That's there's a big thing about playing at home, playing away. You can afford to lose away. You cannot afford to lose at home, whatever the circumstances. That's also because of money. The refs are shaken because of the stress behind it. The young French players are not given a lot of time to basically go into their strides and stuff because you need results quick, fast. So I'd rather get a cheap 20-year-old South African who's already built like an animal than take the time to create another guy just because it's safe and reliable. You think about the foreigners in French rugby. You think it's only the top two. You go to Fédéral 3, so the equivalent of the 5th division, let's say, top 14, you'll always have some sort of Georgian prop. You'll have some sort of Safalok. You'll definitely have a Fijian winger somewhere. And if there's one guy who played a little bit of Super Rugby, he'll be your 10. There's always guys like that. No disrespect, there's no Scotsman, unless they were there on the holiday or something.
That's okay.
But you know what I mean? It's just it's a big topic.
And I think the club owners are one of the most interesting things about French rugby. I mean, in England, the Premiership clubs, the finances are very fragile. They're most of them are privately owned by kind of individuals with a decent amount of personal wealth. In France, it seems almost a level up, but also those guys seem bigger characters. And you mentioned a couple of the biggest ones there, Benjamin, in Max Guazzini and Mohed Boudjelal. Obviously, you played at Stade Francais when Max was the owner. Have you got any interesting stories about him? What's he like? You're laughing already.
You know which ones I want.
Many stories. But again, that's the myth that needs to be killed. Now, so just to sum it up, he's a guy he was an impresario. He was like sort of a lawyer agent for Dalida, which was a huge French singer, Italian born. And then he was massively into the showbiz, the music industry. And then he went to take over and be the president of a radio called Énergie, who then there was a sort of a radio revolution in France in the mid 80s, where radio became privatized, and he turned into the biggest radio in Europe. And he had crazy, so big showbiz. He knew all the stars. He knew he's got pictures he knows the Rolling Stones. He knows Madonna. That type of environment. So not rugby. And then he took over Stade Francais as a passion project when they were in federal, 5th or 4th division or something. He created him something out of absolutely nowhere. Everybody took the piss out of him. What the hell do you know about rugby? And he just transformed things. Guys were forced to wear blazers. They were taking the piss out of. Yes, but then if you get taking the piss out of all the time, it builds a sort of sense of culture. And who are we? And, we'll prove to you that we can. Don't judge me by the way that I dress. Judge me by the way that I play. When the best example I got is that we went to Perpignan with Stade Francais in 2006 when he started with those pink jerseys. And nobody knew that we were going to wear those pink jerseys. We knew that he had an idea about it. He would come with those crazy ideas. Boys, I've got this. What do you think? And then before a game, he laid down those 2 jerseys, the blue ones, the pink ones. And then he's like, well, you guys choose. Every single guy went to pick the pink jersey just because we wanted to tell Perpignan, stuff you. We're going to wear whatever we want. You can boo us, scream at us, spit at us, whatever it is. Not only will we wear them, but we'll beat you. We didn't that day. We didn't win, but at least it creates a sense of unity. in the city as well, culture and values, where rugby was absolutely nothing in Paris at the time, and so you needed to stand out in some way. So Max, to be fair to him, is one of those presidents who had a lot of money, yes, but he also came to see me play when I was like playing for the under-15s. He gave his life and soul to the club. He was incredibly nice, visionary. You could take the piss out of him because he doesn't look the strongest and the most filled up with testosterone guy. I'm telling you, nobody ever stepped on his toes when it's a negotiation, when you're negotiating a contract. He was the toughest businessman. He is the toughest businessman you've ever met. And he's done some incredible stuff for rugby. So I've got plenty of stories. Maybe I need a few beers to let them out. Just give me a little bit of time. But he created this incredible thing where with the calendar. I always remember James Haskell taking the pictures of the start calendar and Max Guazzini smoking those long cigarettes in their little schools. Like, chuck him sand. There's not enough sand. Somebody chuck him sand. And I'm thinking, this guy is the president of my club. And 2 hours later, you were talking about contract with him. And I'm telling you, he would drive you nuts and he would break you in pieces before you sign the paper. So there was this, that's the 50-50 side of him that makes him so complex and so unique.
And Johnny, I'll let you grill Benjamin about some more stories on Max in the episodes to come. But obviously you played under Mohed Altrad as an owner. So is he very different? What's he like?
He's an amazing character, completely different to Max, but you have to understand that every president in France gets into a club for their own reasons. To understand Mohed, you have to go back and understand his story, where he came from. I mean, strangely, he was born Syrian desert. His mother had 2 children out of rape, was raped by his dad twice. He was the second son. His mum then died the day that he was born. Like seriously complex upbringing. Was raised by his granny. Didn't have any education. One day went along to local school, peeked over a wall, saw they were writing, understood nothing, and decided I have to get myself an education. So ended up enrolling himself in school. Came across, I think, to Montpellier with literally nothing to study in Montpellier. Arrived as a young dude with not one word of French. Slowly through, there was a small recession, depression in France, saw some scaffolding lying still. Bought the whole thing, decided to finance a new project, become scaffolding, Altrad. You see cement mixers, scaffolding now everywhere in Europe. I think his company has a turnover of 5 billion. But for Mohed, it wasn't enough. He wanted notoriety for what he'd done, not only in the business world. I think he was the World Entrepreneur of the Year in 2015. I mean, huge levels of success in finance, huge. But he wanted to be known in France for other things, and that was it. Montpellier was his plaything. So you go now to Montpellier, you arrive in the car park, there are 5 Lambos. You get to choose which one you want to drive around for the morning for a laugh if he lets you. He's a really nice guy. But again, it's for notoriety. It's to be known. It's to get his image out there in the French media, French public, to get him up another level because he has the wealth, but he now wants to be known. You speak about rugby. Again, like Max, doesn't know that much about rugby, but loves being involved, loves trying to push a project. It's been hard. There's been, I think, 6 coaches in the past 10 years. And he's going to keep on pushing until he gets that team to the top 14 and wins something like Max did at Stade Francais. So hugely interesting guy. His story is unbelievable. And now he's the boss of one of the biggest playthings in the world. And again, to go back on your point, Ben, you touched on that team that Dulan had. I mean, think about the LNR and the reporting that should be. You talk salary caps and you look at Saracens. I have no idea what the control is with LNR and how it's regulated, but there's just no way that any of these teams are under any sort of salary cap. So again, we'll get onto these things in different topics and different pods, but France is the Wild West. The wealth and the money that goes into these clubs is a different level and it's a different animal. So it's going to be interesting going forward to talk about it every week and try and get into it in more detail.
So there'll be a lot more of that chat to come in future weeks, but just on a very simple level, because you're obviously both very passionate about it. What is the best thing about French rugby and what's the worst thing about French rugby, Benjamin?
By a mile, the best thing about French rugby is not only France, obviously, but is the passion. The passion is just incredible. The passion of the fans, the passion of the people. So French rugby is not played at school. French rugby is played in clubs. So I started at Stade Francais when I was 14 years old, but you can start from the age of 6 in Bayonne, where Johnny played. And then you will grow up. So there's this legacy about where you're from. You represent the region. You represent your mates. You represent your grandparents. You know, that is really sunk into our blood. You need to protect your home, protect your region. So the passion behind it is ginormous. And that's what makes it so fun. I mean, I was lucky enough to play 10 years in Clermont. Marcel Michelin, fully packed, is worth the trip, I'm telling you. It's absolutely stunning. It really is what we love about rugby as well. It's full on, but then everybody will be drinking stuff. Bayonne is a fantastic example as well. I would go and watch a game there. I mean, there's the culture, the singing, the playing, and then there's the good camaraderie after. So the passion is 100% what we love the most, which is what there is the best out of French rugby, because that's who French people are. You know, that's what you need to understand. We are passionate people. We can be random, almost bipolar, extremely susceptible, but we are passionate. And if you convince me to do something, I will go through a wall for you. And in rugby, that's very, very powerful. In rugby, imagine if 15 blokes decide to at the same time. It's incredible. But after a big high, you always have a low. And we're not very good at just keeping the same pace, you know? I mean, I was always mesmerized in Leicester, when I played there in 2007. They were, you know, you didn't want to mess with Julian White, with Ben Kay, Martin Corey, Lewis Moody, all those old school, tough fellas. An hour and a half before the game, I used to walk into the stadium almost with the fans in the same time. Martin Corey would be drinking a cup of tea with a journalist and chatting away in the change room. They are the most relaxed boys I've ever seen. But 45 minutes before, there's some sort of switch on the side of the head. Zoom, game face. Flah. If you miss that switch, they will beat the shit out of you. And that with me and Julien Dupuis, who were like, oh, all jolly, oh, this is all good, you know, nothing's going on. And if you missed it, and then they really, you know, if you offend them by not taking things seriously, they really drill into you. In France, we can't do that. In France, we do not have the brain function that tells you can be super chilled and stay chilled and then just walk on the pitch. We need to wind ourselves up. We let go a lot of energy because of that. But we need to wind ourselves up and stay focused and all that. So to answer your question, because I've been too long, sorry. The passion is the best thing. The worst thing is the lack of professionalism, is the lack of thoroughness, is the lack of reliability. And I'm actually sometimes ashamed of the stories that I hear of how foreign players have been treated either by coaches or by presidents, because they don't do the same thing to the French guys, because obviously there's no language barrier and all that. They sometimes, guys were treating like pieces of meat. So that's not to me. And then it's just the thoroughness. We're always behind on loads of things, you know. You stay behind a training session a couple of years ago. It was already like that. Ask a coach, you know, can you help me do this? Do you like? Everybody's like, oh, eat ass. Oh, look at him, whatever. Whereas in New Zealand, there's like a culture of doing extras. And they don't need a coach for that. They just do extras. That's what they do. Or they'll drink 4 bottles of whiskey on a Saturday night, but the Sunday morning, they'll be doing extras. They'll be doing training on their own. There's this culture of just, you know, improving on your own. Just keep on working. Rugby's fun. So the best is the passion. The worst is the lack of professionalism and the lack of thoroughness.
The cash must be up there too. And we should mention, I don't know whether it's in the south of France or if it's in Tunbridge Wells, but is someone building an extra wing on the house at one of those places? Where is it?
No, I've got small problems. I don't have a roof. So they're trying to fix that at the moment. So I'm sorry, guys, but I can't tell them to stop because I don't want to be rained on.
It won't be there every week, but just to reference
sorry about that.
So Johnny, what for you? What's the best and worst things about playing in France?
There are loads of positives. I think people get caught up on the negatives. For me, again, so Benji's point, the passion is ridiculous. For a Scottish, again, British culture, you sit and watch rugby, it's quite kick and clap. It's not that vibrant. You then get to a stadium. For me, I got to Cast, and I was like, it's a town of 45,000 people. How many people realistically are going to come watch the game? There's 16,000, 20,000 at a home game. It's mental. Half of the town downs tools and comes to watch you play rugby. With that, there's a brass band. It's chaos. They're baying for blood. The environment is just different. So your match day and the following that you get from a town is next level. Then the day-to-day things of being in a French rugby club that I loved were things like the diversity. So if you're coming from a Scottish environment, you've obviously got 85% Scottish players and then a few foreigners. In France, it's maybe 50 to 60%, which will change now with the G flaws going up, but 50 to 60% of your team would be French. After that, you've got Georgian, Argentinian. I had Chileans, South Africans, Kiwis, Aussies. You've got players from every country in the world. So for me, France has become a hotbed of a mix of the world's best talent. And you meet people from all over the world in each team that you play against, and you meet some incredible people. So that, for me, diversity is definitely up there. Then geography, where we are in the world, you can get in a car, travel, see different countries very easily. The weather, again, a Scottish boy coming out to the south of France, you see you training with the sun on your back. I'd never seen it before. So there's all these different things that make up France what it is. Benji, you touched on the negative about the professionalism and the looseness, but that varies from club to club. Every club is run in a slightly different way. I'd say British or Anglo rugby is much more standardized in its approach. And that, you talked about the hurdles earlier, but that's what French is. Every team is different. Everybody that wants to lead an organization has a different idea of how to do it. And they can be ruthless. The treatment of players sometimes isn't good. I've seen a lot of friends that have lasted, 4 months in teams and snapped because they couldn't get their message across in English. They were getting basically bullied or abused by owners and coaches, and that's it. So it's a really mixed place. I've absolutely loved it. It's fantastic. But for some guys, it isn't for them. But those, for me, the best bits. The diversity, the passion that you get, and the club support is unbelievable, definitely.
And you mentioned it there. I mean, we've spoken about owners a little bit, and we'll speak more about that in future weeks. But coaches as well. Coaching in France is something that is often criticised over here in England. They speak about it's not as detailed as it is over here. That may be a myth that we want to dispel, or it may be true. But specifically, the coaches that you've played under, who are the best coaches you've played under? Who are the worst coaches you've played under? Name names. You're both retired now. You can do that. And kind of what makes them good and bad.
I had to go deep into that not so long ago. And the best coach that I ever had would probably be sort of a mix of the different angles of what you come across. I think there's some incredible stories about Franck Azema, who's been my coach in Clermont, and he's just a very human person. He connects with you on a human basis. I always felt, because towards the end of my career, I wasn't looking so much at the human. I was more looking at the efficiency, how good. And it's the English teacher who makes a spelling mistake on the board. That's done for me. I will never respect them for them. I want somebody to actually teach me something, or to be so charismatic that I'll be blown away. Whereas when I was young, you didn't see so much the technique. You just wanted almost a father figure, somebody to reassure you, to help you, to let you grow. So the humanity of Franck Azema, I think, he's just a fantastic bloke deep down in his core. Vern Cotter was a dictator for 6 or 7 years in France, and then obviously for Scotland. But then the 2010 year where they won it with Clermont, he used to batter the shit out of boys the day after you lose a game. So it was like you get a text, welcome, 7:00 in the morning, they would run the hills, do full-on contact. You know how it's like a punishment. So it works once, it works twice, but it doesn't work in the long run, because that's unsustainable. And they lost a quarterfinal. I don't know if you remember, a quarterfinal of Champions Cup in Leinster by like 1 point, and Brock James misses like 16 points by kicking, 3 drop goals, 2 penalties, whatever. The headline was like Calamity Jane the next day, and they get the text again, meet 7:00 in the morning in the changing room. They're like, all right, we're gonna get bollocked again. They got there 7:00 in the morning. Everybody gets dressed in their full training kit, and there's 500 beers. He puts the music on. He's like, all right, lock the doors now. If you finish those beers, then you can go home. And they spend the day laughing, sharing stories, obviously getting absolutely shit-faced, but just living together. That year they won it. They did 4 years, 4 consecutive top 14 final in a row. Same captain, same coach, relatively same groups. Do you know how hard that is to wake up? You're Aurélien Rougerie, a legend of French rugby. He's got nothing to prove to anyone. But you're captain 1 year. You lose. Okay, I'll get back on the horse. Second year, you lose again. I'll get back on the horse. Third year, you lose again. What the hell are you going to tell your boys on the Monday? Let's go again. Yeah, we'll win it this year. It's hard to motivate guys. And he got them by pivoting. So he was a dictator who sensed that his team needed something else from him, and boom, and he went to it. So I had a lot of respect for that. He knew how to adapt to his management. He was good to me because instead of saying, you need to earn my trust, he signed me and he said, I will give you all my trust now, it's you not to let it go. Because I was sort of the hot thing when I was in Leicester. And then I went back to Stade. That's a different story. I'll tell you about it later, but it wasn't a good idea. And so you know how your profile sort of goes. I wasn't in the French team anymore. And I got contacted by Clermont all those consecutive years. When I was in Leicester, when I was in Stade, when I was in Castres. And his speech, Vern's speech, never changed. His approach was always the same. So no. It's like, I don't care about how well you're playing now. I know how good you can be. And that was precisely what I needed in my career. And that's why it hit off straight away. So pivoting, humanity, and then there's loads of other coaches, but I'll stay to that now. Johnny?
We obviously lost a lot more than you with Vern, but we never had the 500 beer story, so I'm gutted that that's the first thing you've led with. That never happened to us. 100% the best coach technically and the most gifted guy that I ever worked with was Fabien Galthié, but he was also the hardest guy to work for. So you touched on the human effect. Again, that's something that's talked about massively in France, is coaching with an effective side. I'm not sure how you translate that into English. Your affectif. Your effect that you can have on people. And it's hugely important how you control a group, how you control respect, and how you motivate people. In British or Anglo culture, it's not the same. You set out a game plan, you get everybody working for the organization, and you just kind of roll it out. Whereas in France, it's more, how can you mediate your structure and your technical with actually, how can we get everyone on board, not have any fights, and keep everyone's morale high. That is more of a primary shift, I feel, in France, is how you look after people, especially the French side. It can sometimes be different with foreigners, but Fabien, and coupled with Mario Ledesma, that was the team at the time. Really good coaching team. The detail was unbelievable. It was the best rugby I ever got to play. It was because of them and the way that we played the game in Montpellier for 2 years. But in terms of working with them, it was unbelievably hard. The way they would talk to people, the disrespect, the derogatory comments, the bullying every day. It really, really was tough. I remember a guy, you'll know him, Benji, Vincent Pello, who at the time was a young tight head coming through. We're doing scrummaging practice and he was struggling. He's now, played tests for France on a loose head. He kills it every week for La Rochelle and he's a good guy. I remember doing scrummaging practice and Mario would just pretend there's a cheeseburger behind the scrum. Go and fetch it, you fat ass. That was how he would try and motivate people. He would just bully people. And the whole scrum we're packing down would go, oh, not again. That kind of stuff on a regular basis, or pulling people by the ears. Come here, you fat pig, get into place. This is where I told you to go. Like the language and the way they spoke to you in any other country, it wouldn't fly. But because you were there and then, and it was France and you were trying to make it work, it worked. So a real mix, some superbly talented coaches, some really bad ones as well. Probably the most Anglified coach I worked with was Christophe Urios, who did really well with obviously Oyonnax, Castres, and then Bordeaux. They were leading the top 14 last year. And he's a guy I think we could look out for this year. Again, after having led the top 14 last year, doing a really good job with Bordeaux this season. Really structured, really into his culture, driving people, getting people to bond with their town. And he has a good template for how to play as well. Super organized and efficient guy. So he's definitely one to look out for this season.
And I think a lot of people will be surprised about those stories about Fabien Galthié, Johnny, because obviously he is the current France coach. So, do you think he's changed? Do you think he's mellowed, or is he still the same guy?
No. I had him in 2012, 2014. Benji, you had him when you were a young kid as well at Stade Francais, I think I'm right in saying. But, there were stories that we heard from when he was at Stade Francais that were the worst, if not the same. There's a guy as well, like at the World Cup, refused to play the third, fourth playoff when he was a player. After losing the semi, he was like, I'm not playing in this third, fourth, and he flew home. It was about him. He wanted to be the best, and that was it. So, look, fundamentally, he is a top-class coach. I've said before, he's the best coach that I've worked with from a technical perspective, but there are personality traits that hold him back. And if he could fix them, he'd be one of the best in the world, 100%. Benji, you have stories from Stade Francais. There's even things from, to give you an example, we had a player who'd re-signed a contract at Montpellier with Mohed Altrad, a 3-year contract, a good sum of money. He'd been playing really well, but Fabien hadn't okayed it. And just to prove he was the boss, he said, I refuse to have that guy. It wasn't me that okayed it. Pay him out. And that was it. The week later, the guy that had signed his contract had 3 years of money arrive in a check in his bank account because Fabien was the boss and he's the one that had the last say in recruitment. Just to prove that point, the guy had to go and find another club, I think sometime in July. So there's a long history of stories, very, very different in levels of energy that get pumped up, but he's an amazing coach, a very, very smart man as well. But there's some stories that would leave a very bad taste in your mouth.
Did you get a similar impression, Benjamin, at Stade Francais?
To be fair, so it's a bit complicated for me to comment on that one because I think what Johnny says is pretty true. But he was my first coach. I mean, I had Nick Mallet when I first arrived in 2003, but I played one game on the bench. And then he was my first coach to actually give me a shot. He trusted me like nobody ever did. He really gave me, because you can say whatever you want about him. He is ballsy. He's got nuts of steel. He backs himself, and he's got great strategy and stuff. But I'll give you an example. So he chucked me when I was 19, 20, a semi-final in Bordeaux against Toulouse, who at the time were killing everyone. And remember that Chabon-Delmas, the Bordeaux pitch, where there's a long tunnel to go through. So you walk for a long, long time. Yeah. And he stood behind me the whole tunnel, and he was just whispering stuff in my ear, do this, do that, literally helping me. I was so focused, I didn't really listen to what he was saying. But fair enough, he's the coach. I'm not going to tell him to fuck off. So I'm walking down and stuff, and I play really well, and we win, and I'm sky high. And at the end of the game, I shake his hand. The first thing he says to me is like, and he comes with he likes to, to play like poker face all the time. He's never really,
Mind games.
Likes to and he puts you off all the time. You're expecting him to give him a big hug, and then he stops and went, "This what? You're not going to say thank you?" I was like, "What do you mean? Did you see how much I helped you in the tunnel? Pretty much gave you that game, didn't I?" I was like, "Yeah, thank." He just wanted me to say thank you, and I'm 20. So I'm saying, thank you, Fabien. I'm not really standing up for myself, but at the same time, he trusted me like nobody else. And he really did help me. And everything that he told me was true. What I worked on worked. And he's the only coach that I ever met that on Tuesday, he's like, hang on. So this is what happens in China. Okay, let's go. Hang on. Let me think. All right, we're going to create this play. We're going to do this, that. And on Saturday, you score. And we did. That's the only time that has ever happened to me. So he is a strategic and strategic genius. Yep. But I've seen him do stuff, not to me, but to others that were very, very tough. He struggled with people who needed a human side. He struggles with people who are not as ruthless and hardcore as him, which is a trait of all the guys who are very, very driven, and they a bit, not like Michael Jordan, Last Dance, but you know what I mean? That type of sort of angle. The only way is tough. The only way is like this. If you need the heart and the soul and stuff, that you can fuck off. But some guys do. And I think the best coaches need to recognize that there's 15 guys in a room, and those 15 are incredible different human beings, and they need to be handled differently. And he was a bit my way or the door, Do
you think those traits that you've both spoken about there mean that he is better suited to be a national team coach, because you don't have 100%. To have that week in, week out?
100%.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say, when you said it, he is 100% the best fit for the French job, because you don't have him all the time. He is very good. He does, you ask Johnny, but he does offer as well an attack rugby. He's not one of those strategic minds that will be like, like the Saracens way, just box kick it and then put pressure in defense. He likes positive, open play of playing pace. So that's really his attitude. So he is absolutely perfect. But because of, Johnny mentioned it, that it's the World Cup in Australia, won by England, 2003. He refused to play the little final, the 3rd to 4th place. He pretended that he had a family problem, but everybody knows in rugby. That cost him the French job for 17 years or 16 years, whatever it was when he had it in 2019. Because then, but you can't blame it. At least he's not a kiss ass. He doesn't want to, how do you say that? He's a strong politician, but he will go with what he thinks is the best, even if it cost him the French job for a long, long time. And he pretty much said it open and bluntly to everyone. It's always been his dream, because you play the best rugby in the world. He's very ambitious, and the best teams in the world. And because you don't have to, and apart from World Cup times where you're 4 months all the time together, you don't necessarily need to connect on a human level as much as when it is day to day in a club environment.
So even to touch on that, even when we were with him in 2012, 2014 with guys like François Tranduc, big players that were part of the French team, Fufu, Fulgence Ouedraogo, big players, we said even then, geez, this guy is capable of ruining an environment in a club perspective because it's continuous and it's every day, but geez, he would be unbelievable if you could take him to the Scotland team or the French team or lead somebody during an 8-week campaign, then a summer tour, then a World Cup, he'd be number one on everyone's list. And I think now that you've got, like you touched on, the attack points. He is the best attack coach in France, without doubt. Then you look at the England game they just had in the Six Nations. the way that they broke down that English defence, it was Fabien written all over it. It's still the same plays that we used in Montpellier, the same open field structure plays and pop balls off shoulders to unlock defences. It was all Fabien. Now you've got him married with Sean Edwards. Unbelievable. So you talked about the kickboxing, the pressure and the defense. Sean now, exit strategies, defense, adding that steel to the French team and marrying it with that French flair attacking rugby that Fabien produces. They're going to be unbelievable. They're only one or half a campaign. They didn't get to play their last 2 games. Again, add Thibaut Giroux, the fitness coach who did Glasgow, then Toulon with Fabien. That guy, you speak to him, you speak to anybody about him that's worked with him, they love him as well. So they've now got a team. That French national team has a coaching structure around them now for the first time, I think personally, in 10 to 15 years, like you touched on earlier, Benji, that will allow them to flourish. So it's amazing that Fabien's there. They've got Sean Edwards there. They've got Thibaut there. They've got a team now with a solid foundation that they can really kick on, allow Dupont, Intermac, all these guys to kick on and start winning things again for the French national team.
I could, just to add up on that, Johnny, I think you're 500% right. It's the first time in history there's an accumulation of quality. And like Johnny just said, not only just quality, but extraordinary quality. Sean Edwards, for once, we pulled our head out of our asses and actually realized we're going to go and get the best defense coach in the world. But remember that 6 months before, the French clubs got asked if they would be okay to have a foreign national side coach. And they said no. Because we think we're too good and too precious and too incredible not to get help from the Warren Gatlins and the Joe Schmidt and all those guys. You know, it's not rocket science. They go and get the best. At least they got Sean Edwards. But not only just to say that, Johnny, because I think you're dead right. Compared to what it used to be. Just do a little rewind and how it used to be a couple of years ago. Jacques Brunel was obviously not the man for the job. He passed a generation. Julien Bonner is a mate of mine, but he was line-outs coach for the French team without never having coached once in his life. But would you turn down the French team? I wouldn't turn. I've never coached 1 second in my life, but I would still say yes to the gig if it was offered to me. The conditioning coach who got replaced by Olivier Giroud and how good he is was Nicolas Jean-Jean. Nicolas Jean-Jean was a CrossFit instructor 6 months before that, but he's got 20 caps for France. So that's why they picked him. The backs coach was Jean-Baptiste Elissalde, who got sacked from Toulouse and then coached the France under 18s. So that's the quality that you're trying to compare with and then you can mention Laurent Labitte and William Servat and all that and new coaching staff. Or if you have to pick the best scrimmaging coach, the best line-out coach with Karim Ghezal and the best sort of backs coach with Laurent Labitte, then yeah, for once we have an accumulation of quality, and that's why the future is so bright, I think.
And just before we move off coaching, I don't know if you could mention Fabien as being a difficult guy, but also a good coach in many ways. Are there any guys that fit that mold that often gets talked about, or is it a myth, the kind of Jouet coaching philosophy in France? And also, Benjamin, obviously not just in France, you played at Leicester under Marcelo Lefreda and Heineke Meyer. They didn't last very long, as well as Cockers. So, I mean, what were those guys like? And are there any examples from both of you of those kind of coaches?
So Jouet is the Toulouse sort of structure was to say, play what's in front of you. So you can actually look like a pretty shit coach if you just say, play on, play what's in front of you. But if you actually look at what it means, it's decision-making of playing what's in front of you. That's where the English are so poor at, to be fair. The English will be very robotic. They need a strategy, they need a backup plan. And as soon as, but the French, they're too loose. They don't. No. If you think properly, you actually play what's in front of you, it just means adapting yourself to an option. You don't play the option for the option. You play the option because while it's happening, you can play two different things. That's a very different way of seeing it. So that's the general idea of French rugby. Build on the motivation and let people play what's in front of them. There's not so much structure and so much sort of phase preparation. But then to touch on Leicester Tigers, you touched a good one there because there's three different angles of rugby there. There's Richard Cockrell, who was a tough bugger. There's Heineke Meyer, who was just the most formidable storytelling guy of pre-match. He used to tell the boys like a story before every game, but it was a story of 2 frogs fall into a milk jug, or in a cream jug, And then the first frog was, stuff this. I'm stopping. I'm quitting. And then he drowned. And the second one kept on pedaling. And guess what? And the boy's like, it made cream? Yeah, it made cream. And then he jumped out. See? So that's how I want you to play today. And you will never give up. We're not quitters. Let's go. And we're looking at us. Is he actually being serious? But it worked because it was genuine and it was fun. I remember every morning he used to ask the guys to get into a huddle and be like, good morning. And then Mo's like, yeah. And they said, no, every morning I want you to yell to the top of your lung, good morning, coach. Okay. So we get there. Good morning. George Shooter, who was a really, really funny guy, would make sure that he would be next to him, in the huddle, absolutely next to him, would scream top of his voice in his ear, good morning, coach. But scream it. But he didn't take it badly. Fabien would sack him probably on the spot just for disrespect. But he didn't mind, so he took it humanly. And then at the same time, you had Marcelo Freda, who poor thing didn't last very long because it was just disconnected. We were doing a tackling a contest drill, and in Spanish, you can call that drill the fisherman drill. But obviously, it doesn't work that way, does it? So you do the fisherman, and you hook the ball. It's just, it was complicated. And he called Richard Cockerell, not Cockers, but he called him Cock the whole time. So he's like, yeah, thanks, Cock. So now today we're going to do this. He's like, no, Marcelo, it's like Cockers. He goes, oh, yeah, sorry. Next day, good morning, boys. Good morning, Cock. Yeah, let's go. It's just complicated.
I'm not surprised he didn't last long if that's the case. Johnny, any examples similar to that?
No, for me, it's just the looseness of France and how random coaches can end up in position. Like we had, again, he's a lovely man, but just not on the right level. A guy called Serge Mijas, who was our coach at Cast. His nickname before he arrived at the club was the Relegator. He'd relegated Biarritz, he'd relegated La Rochelle, and then he came to Cast and we finished tied, I think, third bottom and stayed up by 1 point. It was Bayonne that went down, but in France, it's just a merry-go-round of the same coaches. But if you can persuade one guy with the money, the president, that you can come in and do a good job, you get that job. So, I've gone from having a vision of French flair and jouer, and then coming to France, and it's like having somebody's mad uncle as your coach. Sometimes you get there and you can't believe it. My last coach at Bayonne before Yannick Brou was Vincent Ecceto. Again, lovely guy, but it was just put as much air on the ball as you can and throw the thing around. That was our game plan. So,
Johnny, I've got a question for you for Vincent Ecceto. I want to know if that's true or not. I heard a story because he's a big party guy. He's a bit of a party animal. And I've heard a story that at one point he was so desperate to get the team on a piss up that he sent an official invitation from the club saying, oh, sorry, we've got a team meeting on a Sunday morning somewhere in Bayonne. And so he got the boys all to stay after the game just to go on the piss so that the wives were like, yeah, no, sorry, we've got to stay. Is that true or not?
Yeah. He also, he organized TENS festivals for boys in Mauritius. So took them on a training camp to Mauritius, but it basically was a 10-day piss up. He's an awesome guy, but again, not what you want directing or pushing an organization to be the best rugby team. But if you want to have fun and get on with somebody, he was amazing. Really good. I think he's now a consultant up in Nantes, I think in Federal 1 and doing a bit of work for Canal Plus, but hilarious. And guys like you had Serge Mijas, then you had Vincent at Bayonne. We had Pierre Berbizier, who came in and took over from Vincent for a little bit. And again, just next level. Some of the stuff that you would halftime team talks, I was skippering in French and it wasn't going well at halftime. He'd say, Johnny, Braveheart. What is it? Show everybody, Braveheart. And he would repeat the phrase 15 times. And I'm sitting, he's looking directly at me and everybody else in the change room. I can see all the French kids, all the foreign guys pissing themselves at me because I can't say anything. I'm thinking it's a very loosely based story on an old war and stuff. I can't say anything. I just sit there quietly and he keeps going, 15, show us, Johnny, Braveheart, what is it? And so that gives you an idea. There's different vibes, different coaches. There's some absolutely top class coaches in France. There's some crack ups as well, but it's good fun. It's all good fun. It's a great place and some of the coaches are top drawer, definitely.
So we've touched on the difference in culture a bit. That'll be a running theme throughout, I imagine, and training and coaching and diet and all that kind of thing. You two have both loved it. Clearly, it isn't for everyone, and there are loads of examples of players who have gone over to the top 14 and haven't thrived. So on both sides of things, like Benjamin first, who's the best top 14 importee that you've played with or that you've just seen? and give us a few of the worst who, they don't have to have been a complete failure in terms of what they've done on the pitch, but they just maybe haven't adapted to that difference in culture.
Well, before we get into it, definitely the worst are Jim Hamilton and Andy Good. That's like an absolute definite. Okay, they just came to milk and drain the system. Did absolutely fuck all for the rugby, but that's just a different story. Now, to be fair with all those guys that come over, you need to make a distinction between current internationals, foreign internationals that come to France, who try to do both, and nearly retired guys who can only concentrate on club rugby. To do both is almost humanly impossible. So it's got nothing to do with who they are and why and what club. It almost is impossible. It's just too draining and too hard. And the perfect example, because it came out of his mouth, was Jonathan Davis, that played with me in Clermont. He literally told Wesley Fofana, his partner in the center with us in Clermont, was like, mate, as long as rugby's like this hard and this intense for this long, there's no chance in the world that you'll ever make it in the French team and both the club level. It's just too hard. So the best example of fitting, there's many, but the first one that comes to my mind is Nicky Bendenon. Because Nicky Bendenon is an absolute, for one, he's a legend of a bloke, but he's a fantastic rugby player who sort of got overlooked in England because you guys are too skinny, too small, too this, too that. I prefer Mike Brown, I prefer this, I prefer that. I think he's a hell of a player. And he's a tiny little thing. But the first thing that he did is started learning French before he came. The first day he rocked up at the club, he couldn't obviously speak fluent French, but he could still say a few sentences. And that earns the respect of the whole team. There's also learning. I'm okay because I'm always the first one to sit down next to Johnny and speak to him in English at first when he first arrives at the first club. That's sort of my role in the group. But all the Morang and Para, who's a miserable little shit, but a lovely human being, and all those guys, all they want is, look, another foreigner who's coming over. He just wants to milk it. If the guy gets injured in the first week, he's just here for the social security, and this and that. Nick made the effort of speaking a few words, of being genuinely interested, and he absolutely ripped it up on the pitch. And that year, he was European Player of the Year, after being sort of a good player for Bath, but not even in England team. And he had the best season. He was incredible for us. So there's plenty of examples. Johnny Wilkinson, as soon as he wasn't injured, he was legendary in Toulon, and he was playing week in, week out, and he was incredibly good. And he spoke and speaks, obviously, perfect French. But I mean perfect French. That makes a difference. That shows respect for the country, I'm not saying it's not an easy language to learn, but make an effort, show that you're trying. That's a big thing. So these are the best examples, and apart from Jimbo and Andy Good, who are horse shit in France, but there's I don't know, Ricky Flutie, guys like that just did not bring what they should have. Jonathan Sexton playing for Racing looked average. I'm not saying he's obviously far from being average. He's a fantastic fly half, but you know what I mean. You could tell there was just too much, too harsh. He was used to this European rugby style refereeing, where it's about open play and this and that. You play against Castres when Johnny was there. They're the worst team to possibly play against. But that's what Christophe Furieux sort of cultivated in them. We don't want to be the best team. We want to be your worst nightmare. So every single ruck they're fighting you, stepping on your toes, and just they make it long, awkward, painful, and then very, very tight. And in rugby, it can be 3 points above, 3 points under. You just never know what happens. So, yeah, these are the examples I've got for you, but there's obviously a ton of them.
There's a huge list. Even guys like you haven't mentioned, but had been there longer, come over earlier. Guys like Brock James. I used to love watching him play. The sort of performance indicators. You see if somebody's flying week in, week out for their team. They're well integrated. They've made the effort, and they're enjoying it. Guys like Mamuka Gorgodze, who I played with at Montpellier, he's a Frenchman. The guy's an absolute legend, but he was destructive, aggressive, and amazing for Montpellier and then Toulon every single week for years. There's a long list. Then you've got guys more recently like the Armitage brothers, both Steph and Delon, who were French speakers, but they came over, and the level they were at for Toulon was unbelievable. More recently, guys that are still playing internet, like Finn Russell, Scottish example. Finn is absolutely unbelievable for Racing every single week, probably the best 10 in Europe right now. Zibo as well has come over. He was the top 14 player of the year last year, the year before, I think. So there's a huge list. If you buy in properly on that base level, make an effort with the language and get in with your teammates, France is stunning. From a rugby perspective and the country, it's a beautiful part of the world. If you don't, you come in, you think it's going to be easy. People are going to hand things to you on a plate. They're going to speak to you in English. They're not going to expect you to understand calls in French. You're in the wrong place. I mean, like Jim was a good example, but like Jim came over and that was it. Because we were less structured in RD, he got hung out to dry a couple of times, and that was it. The coaches started to disrespect him. They started abusing him on touchlines in front of cameras. It was messy. And he'd made up his mind after 3-4 months at Montpellier. He was gone. His head was 100% gone, and it wasn't for him. Rennie Ranger, another guy that came over at the same time, who was an All Black, was in the World 15, was unbelievable. But you could see he didn't enjoy the way Fabien Galthié and Ledesma spoke. So he didn't buy in. He was like, this isn't for me, I'm out. And he tapped out mentally after 3-4 months like Jim, and he was gone. So as much as there's a list of guys that have come over here and made it and they have been unreal, there's the other side of the coin where you've got guys like even Joe Rocococo find it really hard at Bayonne at the start. Julian Savea, an example at Toulon, didn't go well for him. Started getting abused in the national press by Bougelal. Quade Cooper, when he first came over, he made the comparison. I remember reading this article. Bougelal made the comparison. So he swapped Johnny Wilkinson for Quade Cooper, and the national headline was, "It feels like I've swapped foie gras for pate." And like I fell off my chair, but that's the kind of stuff you're dealing with. And then you've got to go in the next week, see the guy in the tunnel before you go out to train, and get back on the horse and try and play well for him. Like that is the strange part of France. And if you can't handle that pressure and that conversation that comes with it, which at times can be really harsh, it's a tough place to be, definitely.
Well, the season in the UK obviously hasn't finished yet, but the new season in France starts this weekend, the new top 14 season. So should we have a look ahead to that? Stade Francais Bordeaux has been called off, hasn't it? There were a few positive tests in the Toulouse ranks ahead of their game with Clermont, but they've been retested and that seems all good now. So that is going to go ahead. And there's also 10,000 fans going to that game, which is obviously the most for a while. So what do we make of it all heading into the opening weekend in terms of the way it's been handled by the LNR and just where we stand at the moment?
So I think it's going to be very, very tough. I mean, you think already a lot of the teams haven't had preseason games. Some teams have had not one preseason minute. They've played games against each other in a training environment, but they haven't played any competitive rugby. You then think that, again, in the back of their minds, the players know nothing's been organised by the LNR. In terms of in Britain, we know in English rugby, if a game is cancelled, the team that cancelled it forfeits the game, 20 points to 0. Other team wins and they get the points. In France, they said, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We'll postpone games. So everybody, like I spoke to some of the players in Bayonne and Biarritz this week, they're saying, no matter what happens, we know that come the end of the year, we're going to have a bottleneck of games and weeks, possibly months, where we're playing Wednesday, Sunday. And that's okay if you're Clermont and you have a huge team with a great depth in your team. But, you know, if you're Bayonne and you're trying to develop young kids, you've effectively got espoir kids and a front range team, you're going to suffer. So I'd say it's exciting. Look, everyone's desperate that rugby's coming back. It's amazing that fans are going back. I'm going up to do one of the games for Canal Plus this weekend. I can't wait, but everybody's worried. So they're hugely excited that it's kicking off, but people aren't ready to play yet. And they know that further down the line, there's going to be a huge bottleneck of games where it's going to be super tough for these guys to back it up week in, week out. You pick up 2 or 3 injuries at tight head prop, you don't have a game. So I don't know how it's going to be controlled. I don't know how the coaching teams are going to try and manage their players through the year. It's going to be hard, very, very hard. I don't know what you think, Benji, but I think it's going to be brutal.
I think it's going to be brutal because not only for the lack of preparation, but for the lack of vision. Just like you said, we got struck with the reality of the fact, like the monster that I was telling you that we create with the top 14, which is incredible. And we get all those names there and the stadium full. Yes, but it's a very, very unreliable system. And what's happening now, obviously that could have not been predicted by anybody ever, but still it's just showing the flaws of the system that is too depending on money. Clearly top 14 cannot afford to play even one game with no fans. It's just not possible. 15% of the TV broadcasting rights is what the budget is out of 35, 40 million, whatever budget euros that they have in most clubs. So they cannot afford to do it, but not one. And they said at first it might be 5,000 people. A club like Clermont, who has 550 big and small sponsors, can last 5 or 6 weeks, I think they said. So they're trying to find a solution, but even to the point, there's already a jammed up calendar. And then they're like, no. The reason why Johnny is what he said about they're not going to cancel games in case of COVID contamination within the squad. It's because they can't afford it. So they will play Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, whatever, if you want to. They don't care about player health and welfare and whatever. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they decided to add this barrage, which is like almost like a quarterfinal, like a fake quarterfinal to get to top 14 playoffs. Everybody was already telling them there's too many games. And the first idea they come up, we're going to add a game. They do not care about the welfare of players, plain and simple. They keep on telling you, if you get paid this much money, you want us to create a system for you to get paid this much, then shut your mouth and allow with it. I don't know how many votes there are in the league. There's probably top 14 plus Pro D2 is 18 clubs, I think. Is that what it is in Pro D2 or something like that? So let's say there's 32 clubs plus the player syndicates. Every single year we need to validate the calendar. There's 32 yes and 1 no. The players say no every single year. No, we can't do that, man. You're making us play Boxing Day, New Year's, 6 games without. They say, there's only 4 or 5 games without the internationals. Well, not really, because they leave the week before, and then you need to give them a week of holiday. So in total, it's 8 weeks without your guys. The fans are not happy because they barely can recognize a Clermont to Toulouse side that's facing if you're missing half the teams because of the French internationals, and nobody's happy to do it because it's a bit tough. But we created this monster that needs to eat so much cash. So the problem is that we're sort of stuck in it. So I'm really, really scared that there's going to be down the line the consequences are going to be on players losing their jobs. That's the only thing that I'm worried about. I think from this pandemic needs to be dealt with. It's super serious. Unfortunately, hospitality in the stadium is far from being a world priority. I get that. But I'm afraid that in the system, they're going to have to cut somebody at some point. And when you're trying to align World Rugby, reuniting everybody, all the different leagues of the world to say, how are we going to save rugby in general? And then you get the president of the league to say, oh, by the way, if you want the day before in the press, in the French press, he says, if they want to touch the top 14, it will be war. That tells you how narrow-minded and how much they care about their income in their premiership, in their thing. Whereas the pandemic is hitting everybody in the same time in the world. So I'm just scared that this money is going to hit something being a club going down and then players losing their jobs.
To go back, do you know what I find really interesting about that is, so I can remember Jackie Lorenzetti saying in March, I don't know, end of March, beginning of April, already he calculated, look, if this hits now, we're going to lose €1.5 million a month. So that was in March, April. Then what happened in the UK and all the other unions was they arranged players to take big pay cuts. So in England, maybe globally 25%, Scotland, a sliding scale between 10 and 25%. Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, much bigger, huge cuts. But then I talk to people here in France about what's happening on the club level. There's
15.
Nothing. So if that, but like Biarritz, for instance, was 5. Bayonne, next to nothing. So every club has decided to do different things, but it's way less comparatively than your competitors in your other leagues. Yet at the same time, we know this pile-up's going to go. So I find it strange that the French presidents and the league haven't been proactive in saying, look, let's try and get a claw back a bit now to protect ourselves. Instead, they sort of let it go to keep players happy, but then they're going to shaft the players in 4 months' time when you have this massive pile-up of calendar fixtures. So I just find it really poor in the way that it's been organized so far from the French perspective is that they could have held some money back and protected themselves and the players, whereas now it's going to become a massacre. I think the next few months are going to be messy for French rugby.
And just quickly on the positive tests themselves, I mean, there may be more now, but I think that there have been positive tests at 11 of the 30 professional clubs in France. Obviously, we've had games cancelled already, and there will be more to come, I think it's fair to say. Is that just a reality with the global pandemic that we're in and the situation that is on the ground in France? Or if there were tighter regulations in terms of what players can and can't do and stuff, would you have fewer positive tests? Because I know it's very different in England at the moment, but the latest round of testing in the Premiership, 0 positive tests. So is that just a reality of what's happening in France, or is it to do with regulation?
To be fair, that's a tough argument to say, because Give it a couple of weeks and things can be very different. When you compare numbers a couple of months ago, you're looking at new cases per day. Yeah, but they were testing 5,000 people per week. Now they're testing 5 million people per week, roughly. And obviously there's more cases. That's just statistics. What I want to know is the number of guys who were tested positive in all those teams who actually had symptoms. And there's 99.9999 of them who had nothing. So there's the danger of spreading it to other people. You have to be very, very careful with that, obviously. But apart from keeping people in the bubble, it's impossible. The Stade Français example is a sore one. They got tested on the Monday, 0 positive, and they left for camp on the Wednesday morning. And when they traced it back, they realized that one of the blokes went out in Paris Tuesday night in a bar and this and that, and probably a Scotsman or something. And then had a couple of beers, caught it. Next Wednesday morning, they went on camp, full-on training, full-on contact training all together. They came back the following Wednesday, what it was, there was 20-ish cases. The whole club was like frozen. Everybody got back in quarantine and all this. But nobody, and touch wood, I hope it stays like that, obviously it's a serious, serious thing. But nobody got in trouble. So the reality of having 0 cases is extremely unlikely. The only solution is not to freeze the whole game, but just isolate those guys, in my opinion.
But interesting, that's the first time in a bubble sort of close to me that I've seen cases. I've been so far detached from coronavirus, but this is the first time where it feels real, where you have friends of friends that are being affected in sports teams. And like I think Stade Français, there was 27 guys at the end of the week had it because of that one guy that went out on the piss in Paris. But the scary thing was that, a lot of the front row boys were struggling, like they had lung problems. And that's when it makes you think, shit, this is actually serious. Mm. Although we've been so far removed, we're living in Southwest France, there's no cases. You can see one step removed now. You've got professional sportsmen, elite sportsmen struggling with lung problems after contracting it from one guy going out in the piss. So it's just another indicator to stay vigilant, look after yourselves and don't be stupid, because you can see how quickly it rips through a team. And that obviously has huge repercussions, not only for the team and the health of the individuals within it, but then obviously the sport and things moving forward. So it's crazy, but that's just the way it is for the next few months.
For sure.
Right, let's get into the rugby on the pitch then. It starts on Friday night in the top 14. So I want to get your predictions. So who's winning the top 14 this year? It's very difficult to say with everything that's going on. Who's making the playoffs? Who's getting relegated? Come on, give us a vibe of what's going to happen.
So if you're staying on the sort of the who was hot last year, Bordeaux were absolutely killing it. And I agree with Johnny that you have to keep an eye on them. They've got a great coach. When a club has got sort of a dynamic about it, everything's going their way. But they lost Semi Radradra, who is an absolute butcher of a rugby player, who is one of the biggest freaks I ever. I played with him with the English Babas, and I was blown away. We had Joshua Tuisova on one side and Semi Radradra in the middle. He killed the whole England team on his own. Toulouse last year struggled just because they played the first 10 games in the World Cup where half the team was away. So they will be back and they will be a force to be reckoned with. Clermont, you always have to look at them because I think they really had a tough one last year because I left the club, and I'm irreplaceable, obviously. But now they have some seriously good signings. Really excited about seeing how Sébastien Bézy can form an incredible partnership with Morgan Parra at number 9 and play positive rugby. They will be honestly a force to reckon with. But funnily enough, the wild bet that I have in my head is I think you need to reckon with Stade Français. Stade Français was struggling with management. They got Gonçalo Quesada, who's back, who is a club legend, who's a very, very good manager. Yeah. You look at their team on paper, they have an incredible team. And they were just missing with that culture and sort of coaching fit and stuff. And I have a feeling like they could be the surprise of the season.
I hope so, because it was sad to see how quickly they fell from being champions as well not that long ago within a team stacked full of talent. They'd signed, they picked Maestri from Toulouse, they'd taken Ficou from Toulouse, hugely talented, but obviously they were just crumbling because they weren't being well led. Whereas now, with Gonzalo coming back, I think he'd be a really good guy to get on here as well to pick his brains because he is loved by everyone up there. They could be a surprise package. There's other guys, I think you mentioned all the big ones. So you've got Racing 92. Still have to watch out for Racing. They're still good. They haven't recruited much in the off-season, but great talent, consistent. If they keep players fit, Kurtley Beale coming in as well will add something extra to them. Maybe a second playmaker with Finn Russell. So that's going to be great to watch, I think. Montpellier, again, you've no idea what they're going to throw together with Philippe Saint-André taking the reins and taking over from Garbajosa. So, again, completely unknown quantities. So you've got some teams just bubbling away. You don't know what's going to happen, but you can't look beyond Clermont, Toulouse. These guys are going to be up there again come the end of the year. Bordeaux, consistent. They were amazing last year. I think one that's not going to be there again is Toulon. I think they've, since the big spending days and the coaching changeovers, they haven't quite managed to hit those high notes where they were. And then if you look at the other end of the table, it's going to be a real shit fight. You've got 4, maybe 5 teams now without big budgets, a lot of young French kids, lost a lot of big foreign stars that were holding them together, changed their coaches. So you look at Pau, you look at Agen, you look at Bayonne, you look at Brive. Again, they struggled at parts last year. Bayonne, straight out the blocks, they did amazingly well, beating Racing in Paris during the World Cup. But you think this year, when everyone has their stars and everyone's fit, how are they going to fare? So there's 4 or 5 teams that I'm a wee bit worried about this year. I mean, Cast as well didn't do as well as they should have after winning the championship a couple of years ago. So there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 teams that could shoot it out to go down. And your big dogs are still going to be your big dogs this year, led by some world-class, Cheslin Colby, Jerome Kano, Victor Vito, Finn Russell, these guys throwing together some pretty big games. So it should be some good watching and good fun to commentate on, Benji, eventually.
And you mentioned one of the major new signings to the league there in Kurtley Beale going to Racing, and there are bound to be some fireworks on the pitch with him and Finn Russell. But I can't be the only one who can't wait to hear about the nights out in Paris for those two.
It's part of the Paris life. Huh? He's got to discover it. Listen, if Finn Russell can make it, then he can make it. I mean, it's not a problem. If Ali Williams had a good time in racing, then I'm sure that Kurtley Beale will be fine. It's one of those challenges. But you'd be surprised of how much pressure these international boys, especially coming from Southern Hemisphere, when it's much smaller countries, are under the pressure that they're under in their home countries. So they come to France and they're just relieved. He won't have to worry about the Wallabies. You just have to worry about his rugby, enjoying Paris. I mean, Paris is a hell of a city. And for the nightlife, yes, but also for the afternoons, there's something else to do. So I reckon he'll rip it up, honestly.
So apart from Kurtley Beale, any of the major signings or even signings that might have gone under the radar that we should look out for?
So there's 2 at Montpellier I'm really looking forward to watching. You've got Cobus Reinach, who signed the South African World Cup winner, scrum half. He's electric. You've also they've taken Vincent Rates from La Rochelle. He can sniff out a try line from 50 meters away. It doesn't look like a massive rugby player, but yeah, you got it. But again, really exciting talent. The other one I had was Brice Dulan, who we haven't seen for a long time, but a guy who was playing obviously at Cast, at Racing, and then now is signed at La Rochelle. So a chance for him after being injured and losing his place at Racing to sort of reignite his career and do something cool at La Rochelle with John O'Gibbs and Ronan O'Gara. So there are 2 or 3 guys I think we should watch out for. But that's it. There's a constant churn of talent in the top 14 that hopefully we'll get to talk to, but we'll get to see do some fairly fantastic things on the rugby pitch over the next few months.
I think as well, I don't know what you think about the imports, Benjamin, but there's quite a lot of wingers heading over to the top 14 this season that have got a kind of big reputation. I know Kotaro Matsushima, the Japanese star from the World Cup, he's gone over there. Ben Lam from Super Rugby scored bucket load of tries. Gabriele Bitoy from Quins in the Premiership as well. So there should be some exciting rugby.
Oh, they're clearly coming for the cash, let's face it. It's just because they're money-grabbing, very, very fast people. They come for the excitement. Matsushima, I mean, I almost mentioned him. To be totally honest, I don't see the fit. And it's my club in Clermont. I think he's obviously a very talented rugby player. I mean, you saw him at the World Cup. He ripped it up, and I was there commentating. To be honest, I didn't know who he was, and he was just incredible. I just think top 14 does not really suit him in terms. It's going to be tough. It can be wet. It can be, malls and brawls and rucks and all that. And that just doesn't seem to suit him. But he can be the prime Nick Abendanon example and actually rip it. And he's definitely has got the qualities. But there's incredible imports. There's also the way that the team uses them. There's no point of having a lamb in Bordeaux if you don't feed him the ball. But if the boys are ready and they actually want to show some positive things on the pitch, I mean, talent is extraordinary. Then it's just getting used to what it is to be refereeing in France, getting used to what it is to living in France, being French, being confronted to French people, and just stop being, telling me, oh, but they don't ref the rucks in France. Yeah, well, that's what it is. Just deal with it. Clean them yourself. Bakis Bota did it for years, and he dealt with it. It was fine.
And just quickly before we go, obviously the new temporary format for the Champions Cup was announced this week for 2020-2021. 8 French teams. Quite a convoluted system in terms of, big 12 teams in each group and then playing a couple of games against home and away. What did you make of all of it, and particularly from a French angle, having 8 teams in there?
I think so. I'd go back. I remember playing for Fabien Galthié, and they don't look at, or certainly Fabien didn't, because it was a different type of club and they were trying to reach for those heights. But he said, look at it as a joli cadeau. He was like, look at it as a pretty present. You do with it with what you can for 2-3 games. If you're still in it, you go for it. Otherwise, we just chuck it. It doesn't matter. And I think that'll be the exact same now. We've talked about the pressure of 4 or 5 teams down the bottom now who aren't going to play Champions Cup rugby, which helps them. But if you think now, before there were 6 guys battling out with one eye on Champions Cup, one eye on top 14, they all now know how important economically top 14 is. I think if after 2 games, these teams aren't winning in Champions Cup, it's gone. They have to focus on top 14 because it's going to be an absolute dogfight this year, especially with 8 teams playing as opposed to 6. It makes it even harder to stay in the top 14. So that's the kind of what we're going to see, I think, is the byproduct of an extension and the addition of 2 extra teams. But in terms of the wider European spectrum, it's exciting. Like, you get to see different teams from different countries playing at the highest level. Again, different kind of level, running quick rugby, well refereed. So it'll be a big test for the French teams to get up and running. But that's it. My worry is it'll be poorer than it was before. And if these teams aren't in it after 2 games, it'll be gone. Back of the mind into the bin and back to top 14, because they have to be on form in top 14 and winning games. Otherwise, you're straight down 12th place and you potentially 14th and gone. So I don't know what you think, Benji, but I just think it's a nice idea, but it makes it even harder for French teams.
I think it's a great idea to actually adapt and to try to find a solution instead of being stuck in their own ways. And, saying if you touch 2 European leagues, it's going to be war, like top 14 did. At least they're trying to be proactive and find a solution, which I think is good. But I totally agree with Johnny. The pressure is sky high. We're talking about survival, not even being ambitious, just literally surviving. And so the guy who gets relegated to second division is dead meat. So they're going to have to concentrate on top 14. It's already going to be tough enough. The only thing is the few teams that play it seriously, Clermont, Racing, Toulouse, they will go for long. They will go for long, and I think it's going to be super exciting. I'm extremely looking forward to European rugby. I'm a huge fan of European rugby. I really do think it's the one level between international rugby. It's what I love about rugby. I want to see French guys play the Welsh and play the Scottish and play the Irish and the English and all that, and just have those different types of rugby, different personalities. I love those clashes. I think that's what I love the most. And then you have a few glasses of wine or Guinness or whatever it is after. But that's what it is. That's what we fall in love with rugby with. We love the Brits when they're going to get obliterated in France when they come over, but we love to drink Guinness until we pass out when we go to Ireland. That's part of rugby, and that's what we all love with it, and that's European rugby. And for those who are not lucky enough to play international rugby, so I'm super excited that they found a solution. I do agree with Johnny. I think it's going to make it, unfortunately, even more cut edge in terms of we play it serious or c'est un joli cadeau and then forget about it, which is the mentality in some teams, which is very disappointing. Never been mine, but it is the reality. But still really looking forward to it.
Well, hopefully that's whetted the appetite ahead of Europe in the weeks to come and the top 14 starting this weekend. Thanks, Benji. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks to everyone for listening as well. Don't forget to hit subscribe on whatever platform you get your podcasts on. Leave us a nice 5-star review, maybe, if you have time.
Merci beaucoup.
And we'll be back for episode 2 with a special guest next week. So until then, it's à bientôt, guys.
À bientôt. Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys.